Hello, everyone, and welcome to Miss Happy Catholic's channel. I'm Laura, and our guest today is Andrew Bartel. Andrew, would you like to say a few words of introduction?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Laura. My name, for anyone who's familiar with me, from my debate on the Pints with Aquinas YouTube channel or my open letter on Catholic World Report, I am a former adherent of the SSPX, as well as a sedevacantist for a brief time. And so anyone who's read my open letter can see a little bit of my journey if they want to go and read that there. But we're going to be getting into that a little bit today. I live in Montana with my wife and our 3 children, where I work as a glazier. I install residential and commercial glass projects. And I am also a lay Dominican of the Western province. And I'm also currently pursuing an undergraduate degree at Holy Apostles Seminary and College in English and philosophy.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, we're so happy to have you today. How are you doing?
I'm doing just great.
That's really funny. I'm sorry. Obviously, we don't have all the professional equipment, but that's okay. We'll do what we need to do anyway. Okay, so I have some questions for you today. Starting out, just to kind of get you going, since the beginning of this year, you've been sharing your story more, and I'm kind of interested to hear more about your time in the Traditionalist Catholic movement and the emphasis on how that affected your family life growing up and up to date. Like, just start out, with whatever kind of comes to you, but just let us have a little peek into that, because obviously the domestic church is a reflection of the wider church, and where we place ourselves in that can really bear fruit in our home. So
No, I really appreciate the invitation to come and talk about this aspect of my journey and of this issue, because this is the one that's the closest to my heart, is the family, the effects that it has on the individual, but also on the family at large, which is why my emphasis when I talk about it is usually in the realm of moral theology, because I'm very interested in the virtue, you might say, the life of virtue and sin, and its effect on that life. And I think that's a really important aspect that's often forgotten in the debate on this subject, because so often we just get caught up in the canonical and official regulations of everything, and even the politics of everything, and we lose sight of the fact that these issues at large in the church actually impact people on the boots on the ground home life level, like you so beautifully said, the domestic church. So our whole saga began back in Okinawa, Japan, which was where my parents, after reading Scott Hahn's Rome Sweet Home, came into the Catholic Church. And that's where I and my 2 other siblings at the time, we're a family of 10 now, but at the time in Okinawa, Japan, there were 3 of us. We were all baptized there on Kadena Air Base. And my parents were both, of course, in the military. My father was in the Marine Corps, which is why we were stationed there. And subsequently, he got an honorable discharge because he wanted to be able to spend more time with his family. And we moved to a beautiful small town community in Montana. And when we first came here, of course, my parents had to go through the whole RCIA program, and so this was where they began that process. And they were rather surprised, and in many respects scandalized, by some of the things that they were being taught in that program by the nun who was running it, as well as some of the worship experiences that they were having in the liturgies, honky-tonk masses, the handing out of jelly beans to kids, during communion, and things like that. And then, of course, it was on the reservation. So the nun was teaching strange things like, to the Indians, oh, you can also say, north, south, east, west, and
Whoa.
things like that. So they were like, well, I don't know if this is the Catholic Church that we thought we were joining, what's going on here.
Yeah.
And so they were introduced to kind of the you might say the Latin Mass community or the traditional Catholic movement, first in the church itself, such as indult Catholic masses and the Fraternity of St. Peter, and that was what began to give them what they thought was the answer to the whole crisis in the church, that everybody had gone haywire since the Second Vatican Council, and you had to try to kind of preserve things as they were before. And there was an encounter that my parents had after coffee and donuts at one of the FSSP masses, and my mom, they were talking about the Latin Mass and the permission to have the Latin Mass, and my mom asked, well, what would you ever do if Rome took away the permission for you to have the Latin Mass? And the woman just said, oh no, they won't do that because they know we would just go back to the Society of St. Pius X.
Whoa.
And my mom was like, well, she had heard about the Society of St. Pius X, but it had been from like a Catholic Answers magazine, I believe. And on it, it had, Archbishop Lefebvre with kind of a funny look on his face. And, is this man a schismatic? And it was like, this creepy kind of portrayal. And so she's like, well, what do you mean? You go back to this, this group? Why? Well, that must be where the fight really is. And they were also told by a fraternity priest that as long as they could go to the SSPX masses, as long as they didn't talk to anyone, just don't stay and talk to anyone, but you can go to their masses. And so they started going.
No, I really recommend to any of our viewers to whom Andrew is a new face, really recommend checking out some of his other videos on YouTube that he does with the Logos Project. And Dom and John Salza, they've been doing a series every week. They put out a new video about the SSPX and just kind of helping educate people about the history and, their just things different issues that people have heard different things about. They're trying to clear things up canonically and, by looking at moral theology and scripture and things like that, just to clarify, because there hasn't been a whole lot of education about the society. And the society has some series out there that are, promoting their different, positions and things, but there hasn't been a sort of a counter series to explain what those positions are rooted in. And so, Andrew, I'm just telling everybody about your other videos on YouTube and looking up the Logos Project, and also your debate with Jeff Kassman that you did. Was that in April?
Yes.
April?
No, it was May. I think it was May. Yeah.
That was May. That was really good. I watched that a couple times and I got a lot out of that. You have to really just soak this stuff up. It's like one listening doesn't get it all for me. I have to go back another time or two, and then and it's just amazing. It's always so packed. So anyway.
Yeah. Well, sorry for the interruption, Laura.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's the electrical storm that's going on right now around my house. There's kind of some thunder.
Oh no.
But yeah, it's kind of reminiscent of my debate a little bit.
Good.
Usually for some of my other live streams, I'm able to go to a place with a little bit of better connection. But where I live here, it's a little bit iffy because we haven't had it updated with all the fiber optic cable. I think a lot of it's still on the copper wires. Yeah. And they oversold it. So it's living in Montana.
Oh yeah. There's way more pluses than negatives. So we'll just take it the way it is. No, we're glad to have you back. Okay. So you were talking about Lefebvre on the cover of this magazine, Catholic Answers, talking about the society and how your mom knew about it.
Yeah. So of course my parents always want to be on the front lines. And so they're like, well, that must be where the fight really is, because that means that, the thing that matters, being able to have, the traditional Latin Mass is being held up, being sustained by Archbishop Lefebvre and his Society of St. Pius X, and not these other, traditional Catholic communities in the church per se. Mm-hmm. And so They also began to read the letters of Bishop Richard Williamson as well as get other different periodicals and magazines. And so eventually they decided to make the switch to fully support fully and exclusively support the Society of St. Pius X. And that, I should say, that exclusivity lasted until my mother she discovered Sedevacantism, which is the belief that the chair of Peter has been vacant since 1958, the death of Pope Pius XII. And she became convinced of this from a group of priests who had broken away from the Society of St. Pius X and who had been originally ordained by Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre. And this, some of them were even district superiors, happened in 1983. And it was over some of what these priests believed, that Archbishop Lefebvre had fallen into certain errors in ecclesiology, the teaching of the church on its own divine constitution, as well as the papacy. And they also rejected that the Archbishop was choosing to
Hey, Laura, can you hear me good?
Hey, awesome. Thanks for joining us.
Anytime.
You were so lonely in the chat there. I figured you should have your seat too.
Anytime. The music in the background is still going. There should be a when you go to, is it not banners? It's something else.
Oh, Brand.
Yeah.
Go. There, I got it. I shut it off.
You're good.
My first time, so I'm just getting the...
No, you're fine. I remember my first time. It was pretty chaotic. I had to go back and edit some stuff out and everything. But
oh
yeah.
My gosh, yeah, I didn't know you could do that. That's so cool.
Yeah, you have to wait till the video basically fully uploads to YouTube. Then you can go into editor. If you want, I can show you later. And you just you can trim out some parts of the video. So
okay. All right, sounds good. I'm getting some texts from Andrew here. We're just telling him that we're waiting for him. I think he's feeling a little despairing that he's going to be able to get back on.
Oh, okay. Technology.
If all else fails, we can reschedule. But gosh, it'd be nice to hear a little bit about your background and your, experience growing up in tradition.
Sure. I started to take over, Andrew. I guess I'm just kind of, stealing the show here. This is really funny. Sure. Yeah. So, I grew up in the society. I was born into it, baptized, received First Communion, went to confession there. I slowly moved away when I was a young teenager. It was like a process, and we ended up in the fraternity St. Peter. I received a confirmation, not in the society, in another traditionalist group that was in union with the Holy See. So, it was mostly just my kind of investigating the theology that led to the council that made me realize, and also like kind of reading in the past, like reading St. Francis de Sales and St. Robert Bellarmine, realizing that there was a problem here, like ecclesiologically, like somehow there's this kind of overall position where the church seems to have defected officially when it comes to the preservation of tradition, and that it's us now who are doing what the church is supposed to do, and that didn't sit right with me. And so diving deeper and investigating, reading all the theologians, well, not all of them, I'm still reading a lot of them. It's a lot of work. I'm discovering new things literally every single day. So it's a lot of fun, and studying brought me closer and closer to to the church, an appreciation of the council, of the popes, and that's basically it in a nutshell. I still love Latin chants, incense, all the smells and bells. I go to a Novus Ordo on Sundays. Mm-hmm. The priest there is excellent. He's incorporating more incense, ad orientem, and stuff like that. Nice. It's still a little difficult for me because I miss the the beauty and the silence and all that stuff. But we're working on it in the church. That's the thing. You got to be in the church to work on it, not leave to preserve it. It's not how that works. Yeah.
Awesome. No, it's so good to hear you say. I mean, I wish we'd been able to stick together more all these years and just see where we'd be at now. But the what ifs are kind of a waste of time.
Yeah, I mean, and you see this. I mean, after councils, the church's history has proven that after councils, there's a storm. I mean, I was reading Cardinal Ratzinger. This actually might have been before he was a cardinal, and he was talking. It might have been the council. Is it of Ephesus? I can't remember exactly what council it was, but he was quoting from one of the church fathers who was writing kind of angry, like how everything's chaos. Everyone in the church is complaining, and I'm like, that sounds just like us. So
no.
Yeah.
Right. It's good to know that this isn't the first time, because a lot of people talk about it like, oh my gosh, this has never happened before. It's like, yeah, it hasn't happened like this to you, but this is old news as far as the church goes.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's the church is a boat, and the seas are turbulent, and that's just always the case. Especially when you need to kind of re-steer the ship because it kind of was going not in the wrong direction, but it was like kind of tilting too much on one side.
Yeah.
When you re-steer and you got these stormy waters, it creates chaos, but it's for the sake of the destination. So yeah.
Right. No. Well, thanks for sharing a little bit. I'm curious, is the rest of your family still in exclusively in tradition, or are they kind of doing back and forth or anything?
No, we're pretty much Catholic. And that's not wrong. Not that. No, that's not wrong. No, we're pretty much all in communion with the Holy See, accepts the council, and we love tradition and we love beauty. So I'm very grateful for that. Yeah.
That's awesome. Oh, good.
Yeah.
So you can relate pretty well with your family on things, or are you kind of
not all members of the family, but like for example, me and my older brother, we often talk about church politics and stuff like that, and we're pretty much on the same page. I mean, overall, it's pretty good. Just little details here and there where we might quibble, but it makes it fun. It's family reunions aren't fun if you don't fight.
No, that's something that was so interested in when I first met Andrew, was realizing his family's dynamic of just always having this open floor kind of thing, like, oh, you don't agree on this? Well, let's talk about it. Let's fight about it. Like, we still love each other and it'll be fine, But I thought, oh, that's so healthy, really. Andrew's back. Oh, I don't want to be big. Sorry.
Okay.
I'm experimenting with all these different...
So now I need to talk really, really, really fast before the next interruption, right?
Oh my gosh, yeah, do it, Andrew. Oh my gosh.
All right. Well, if I cut out again, we'll try another time. But yeah, it's like I said, there's an electrical storm going on, so I think it's just causing some issues. But it seems to be my cross, my internet cross. But
I took the opportunity to steal the show. So
yeah, hey Dom, man, I
appreciate
you coming to the rescue.
Get in the screen.
That's awesome. No, it's been so great to meet Dom and get to talk with him, because we share so much in common. It's just really amazing. So much of our experiences, the impact that the experience has had on our families, and on our own spiritual lives. It's funny. Often we'll make a show and then we're like talking for an hour afterwards, because there's just so much to talk about. And then Dom's always like, why weren't we streaming that too?
Yeah.
But anyway, so yeah, I guess I'll jump back into it. Please feel free to stay on, Dom.
I can bow out. I need to get some reading done to try to get another guest on my show. So
right. Okay. Well, thanks.
Good luck. If you need anything, let me know.
Okay, Dom. All right, here we go.
All right.
Expect the unexpected.
This is the Wild West of
the inconvenience is an adventure wrongly considered, and an adventure is an inconvenience rightly considered. So this is an adventure.
Yes, that's right. All right, so I'll pick up where I left off. I believe it was around the time when they had decided to become full adherents,
Mhm.
and then my mom was, of course,
Oh yeah, the 9.
making
You
the
were talking about
transition.
the 9.
Yep,
Yeah.
to sedevacantism, and they were able. They still kind of had disagreements because Dad respected the leadership of Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre and Bishop Richard Williamson, and he believed they had struck the best balance. And so he didn't feel like sedevacantism was the best or healthiest option, but he was willing to tolerate it since there is an understanding, at least among a certain spectrum of traditionalists, that that the times are difficult. It's kind of like the Great Schism, and so you're going to have Catholics trying to figure out the solution to the crisis. So there is a little bit of patience to a certain extent for those who hold sedevacantist, beliefs, and so they were able to kind of keep the peace, you might say, because of, again, they were united in their rejection of what had happened after the Second Vatican Council and of the reforms and of all the new sacraments and everything, or new sacraments as we called them, and so that was able to last until it was about the year 2000. Well, it was 2012, 2013, when the resistance began to happen to what was happening to with the discussions in Rome with Bishop Fillet and the other superiors general. They were trying to come to some kind of an agreement, and of course we had been following closely Bishop Richard Williamson's letters, and it was in those that he was calling out the leadership and exposing some of the things that were going on that he believed was unfaithful to the Archbishop's legacy. And so we saw the whole fallout, the open letter written by the three bishops to Bishop Fillet telling him that he was going too far, and then the letter that Bishop Fillet sent back to them chiding those three bishops for overreacting. And it was just this, it was the biggest battle in the Society of St. Pius X since the legal battles with the 9 in the 1980s. And there were a lot of priests, including the Dominican community that I was a part of from 2011 to 2012. They decided to side with Bishop Williamson and the resistance as well. There were other religious communities that decided to part ways with the Society of St. Pius X and align themselves with the resistance as well. So it was a significant breach, and we had to decide, okay, well, who are we going to side with? And I was listening to both sides, and I came to the conclusion that the resistance were definitely the ones, according to the writings of Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, the majority of them, because there was a time when he held a soft line position, which were the ones that were being appealed to by Bishop Fillet and Father Schmidberger and others, such as his letter to Pope John Paul II after he became Pope, as well as the 1988 Accord, which he signed, in which he accepted all of the Second Vatican Council, interpreted in light of tradition, as well as the complete validity of the new rite of Mass. But that was for very brief, times that he actually held that view. The majority of the time are those views which he espoused during the council in his opposition to a lot of the documents, as well as his writings, such as I Accuse the Council and They Have Uncrowned Him, in which he, rejects and says that the Second Vatican Council is not of God, right? Wow. And so I said, okay, well, the Archbishop was definitely hardline most of his life, and that's definitely the position that he held up to his death, since he died not in good graces with Rome, excommunicated, which of course is considered a badge of honor, because we don't want to have communion with what is called the false church or the conciliar church, and so so we had these resistance priests over to our house, and to say mass and to hear their side of things. So that's what we decided we were going to go with, except I was still having reservations. And then there was also something that one of the resistance priests told me when we had them over to our house, which was that the errors of the Second Vatican Council didn't begin with the Second Vatican Council. It actually began with popes before, namely Pope Leo XIII, and that the errors in his writings were some of the things that led to the errors of the Second Vatican Council. And they're not actually alone in this assessment. That's actually very accurate, because Leo XIII was one of the first popes that you might call one of the first modern popes, who decided to usher the church into the modern world and stop staying behind kind of the approach of Pope Pius the Ninth. And that whole, because of course he was living through the conquering of the papal states and all the turmoil that went with, and the challenging of the Pope's authority. And then, of course, it was right on the heels of the French Revolution and a lot of the modern eras. So the church was kind of anti-modern. And Leo XIII was the one that began to change that and say, well, no, everything in the modern world is not to be rejected. Things like democracy and some of these positive principles that had come from the Enlightenment. And so he was the one that began to first start reconciling and acknowledging the good, and realizing that we were not going to go back to a principally monarchic or aristocratic society, that the modern world had definitely launched into an era of democracy. So it was some of his teachings that they reject, and at least some of these hardline resistance priests. And I thought, well, if we're supposed to pick and choose these popes, how can I trust any pope?
Yeah.
How do I know that there aren't also errors in there as well? And so it was at this time that I definitely more seriously considered sedevacantism, because my mother was introducing me to some of these prominent sedevacantists, namely Jerry Matitix, very, very brilliant man. And there are also other brilliant men such as John Daly and John Lane, Father Cicada, and others who were part of this movement that were making a lot more sense and seemed a lot more consistent to me than what I was hearing from society priests, either resistance or mainline. And so I started delving a little bit more into that. But the chief problem I began to encounter with the sedevacantist position, which I was never able to reconcile, even delving into the these different sedevacantist theories, was the problem of the visibility of the church and the perpetuation of the hierarchy, and how you were ever going to have a functional papacy ever again. And it was pointed out to me that the sedevacantist error is actually very similar to that of conciliarism, which was the idea that a council could depose a pope. And this error especially originated around the time of the Great Schism. And that's why it's called conciliarism, because it means the emphasis was on the council. And it was at that time that the council decided to depose the true pope and the anti-pope and elect its own pope. And that was what created the situation of having supposedly three popes.
Yeah.
That idea that the council can be above a pope has been condemned and is not consistent with Catholic theology. But in practice, that's exactly what sedevacantism is that the church at large can recognize that a pope has lost their office, either through heresy or negligence or whatever it happens to be, and then can start over again.
Yeah.
And it just creates a environment of chaos.
Oof.
And so, of course, this problem of the lack of functionality of the papacy, the loss of its active value or its active powers, is a serious philosophical problem with the theory, as well as the problem of visibility, which Jerry Matitix has admitted is a serious problem that sedevacantism as a theory applied to today can't get around. So I said, okay, so there's truth on the sedevacantist side, there's truth on the recognize and resist side, or the SSPX side. Both of them have a slice of the pie. That means that neither of them have the answer. Neither of them have the fullness. And thankfully, he introduced me, Jerry Matitix introduced me to St. Francis de Sales. And in the first part of that, he talks about mission, and that the clergy, in order to have the authority of the church, the magisterial authority, have to have either mission given to them directly by God, the proof of which is extraordinary miracles, or they have to have mission delegated to them from one that has received immediate mission. An example that Francis de Sales gives in the Old Testament is the delegation of power from Moses, who had immediate mission, to Joshua, who then had immediate mission. And then in the church, of course, all the successors of the apostles and the bishops have immediate mission passed down to them from the apostolic fathers and from the apostles. And I realized the only place where you can find clergy who have this mission, as it's delineated by Francis de Sales, who's firmly in line with the tradition of the church on this. You can find his teaching echoed in multiple other places, is the Catholic Church, what I had believed was the modernist conciliar church. So I realized that, well, a state of vacantism was a dead end, and the SSPX and other recognized resist groups were a dead end. So that means that if I was going to continue to be a Catholic and not become Orthodox, or just leave the faith entirely, I would have to reconsider some of my firmly held beliefs that had been passed down to me on the evils of the modern church. And as I began to re-examine them, and I had been convinced enough, of course, that the church was the church. And once I had certain of my problems clarified for me, even though I didn't have all of them worked out, I said, this is the Church of Christ. I am just going to trust. And as time went on, after I came into full communion, one by one, each of these issues that I had with the Second Vatican Council, or the new reforms that followed, or some of these things that trads are very scandalized by, such as Assisi, the kissing of the Quran, things like that, I've been able to reconcile those. And there are very good reasons for either why they were done, or why just the fact that they were done did not necessarily constitute, apostasy. Closer to, like, say, the kissing of the Quran. People say, well, then that means that's a slap in the face to all the martyrs who chose to die rather than do something like that, commit an act of blasphemy. But we have to realize that the context is very different. They weren't holding John Paul II at gunpoint and telling him he needed to kiss the Quran, which would then be say, okay, you need to kiss the Quran, and that in and of itself would be a rejection of the faith. No one was forcing him to do that. The context of telling somebody to trample a crucifix under pain of sin as a rejection of Christ is very different from a gesture that was, diplomatic in nature. He was not forced to do that. His intent was to honor what was ever good in there, and not necessarily to affirm the errors that can be found in the Quran. So you just have to look at the different contexts. So anyways, a lot of these issues I was able to reconcile and say, you know what, you just trust God. Even churchmen, even if they make mistakes, God remains with His church, and it will continue. And this is when all hell broke loose in my family, because of course my parents were at odds with each other because of the whole fallout with the 2012 split in the SSPX. But that just got worse when I decided that I was going to go back to the Novus Ordo Church, and so it was like this. It was a three-way split. My parents entrenched themselves in their respective positions even more, and they became more adamant and angry at each other's positions because they believed that was one of the things that had led me to apostatize and go back to, the evil modernist church.
Wow, that pattern of splintering, I just have to say, it's crazy. I mean, I was thinking about that your parents didn't go, oh my gosh, like, what did we do wrong? Here, we got to pull back together and like figure this out. We got to get on the same page because we need to like help Andrew to find the right way. It was like, you're wrong and he's wrong. And this is a nightmare. Like, I just thought, holy cow, it's like they had no firm foundation, so that they just crumbled more when there was more pressure.
Yes, right. Because there's this facade, because of the strength of the organization of the Society of St. Pius X, there's this facade of, organizational strength, you might say. Because of the charism of Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, he was able to rally many priests to himself, and many people were willing to even, maybe put aside their doubts or their issues in order to follow his leadership. As John Salza has said multiple times, and pointed out rightly so, the Archbishop really is a rule of faith for the Traditionalist Catholic who accepts his leadership. Even if he may be completely wrong, especially in an area such as collegiality, they say, well, we respect the leadership of the Archbishop Lefebvre, and to reject his positions would be unfaithful to who he, either during his lifetime, it would be unfaithful to his person, or after his death, it would be unfaithful to his legacy. But then once the resistance happens, it's like, okay, so now you have two SSPXs, and my dad decided to go with the resistance. And so now we didn't even have, and then they began to split and have divisions even among themselves shortly after they broke off as well. And so now Bishop Williamson has consecrated another bishop. And the superiors of the society, Bishop Fillet, found themselves in the awkward position of condemning Bishop Williamson for doing the same thing that Archbishop Lefebvre had done, according to the same reasons, that they had to preserve the tradition and resist the compromise that had come about in the authority of either the SSPX or the Conciliar Church. And then after that, I think Father Pfeiffer also was at odds with Bishop Williamson's approach, and he was able to somehow scrounge himself up a bishop and try to get himself consecrated as well. And so it's this constant, it's a mess. It's very similar to, right. And that's why we see these similarities between sedevacantism and the recognize and resist position held by the SSPX, is that there is no ultimate authority principle that a Catholic conforms themselves to. It's a pick and choose your authority. Follow the SSPV, Society of St. Pius V, Society of St. Pius V, and Father Cicada, or follow the Took-line bishops, follow the Congregation of Mary Immaculate Queen, or follow Father Kramer, or follow Father Feeney, or follow, it's just like the Reformation, actually. And that's something that we have pointed out multiple times, is that the sedevacantists and the SSPX are operating under a Protestant ecclesiology, which is the church is the faithful who have preserved the faith, not the juridic structure, not associated with the Pope or Rome anymore, but those who cling to tradition. And there's even false quotes that are circulated, such as the one by St. Athanasius. I think he said, even if the church was reduced to a small few or handful, that's where the church would be. That's actually a fabricated quote. And yet that has been circulated among the traditionalist movement. But the interesting thing, and I think this is more in line with kind of what we're talking about today, is it was interesting to see how the same thing that was happening in our ecclesial community of the Traditionalist Catholic movement then played out in my family and ended up splitting my family three ways. It does not bring unity. And that was us being faithful to traditionalist principles. We were faithfully living a traditional Catholic life. So you can't say that what happened to us was, the fruit of some kind of dysfunction or sin. We were a very good and decent Catholic family. No abuse. My father was a wonderful man, example of manliness. My mother was just a beautiful woman who loved the faith very much. So we didn't have any kind of, any kind of abusive dysfunction that was going on in our family. We had a very happy family life, but it was through our complete immersion into the traditional Catholic movement that led to this. That was the actual fruit. And a lot of people want to reject my testimony and the things that I have to say, saying, well, that's just your personal experience. That's not different. That's different from mine. My experience has been different. But we have to look and say, well, yeah, you can have different subjective experiences because you may belong to a different community, or you may be not exposed to the same things. Or, I mean, there's just so many factors that can play, that can depend, that can decide what your experience of the movement is going to be. But what you have to look at the different subjective experiences and say which one is lining up with objective reality.
Yeah.
So that's where subjective experience or personal experience has value, is when it is in fact a reflection of objective reality. And I have tried to show from how the situation of my family and what happened was actually a fruit of the objective reality of the separation of the SSPX and the Sedevacantist groups from the church. It is a direct fruit of that separation, or in the technical terminology, of that schism, of these various schisms. And this sin, which is a sin against unity and the unity of the faith, leads to division. It leads to hatred, to animosity, to bitterness. And that those are the fruits that play out. And it's actually funny too, how this worldview actually affects everything else that you think about as well, like politics, or even your entertainment and things. I remember one of the things we always thought, of course, that the Confederates, right, they were the ones who were resisting the institutional union, right? So of course they were in the right. And I know the Civil War is a complicated situation, I understand, but of course our worldview made us definitely be more, what would you say, positive toward the Confederate side, the rebel side, right? They were the ones resisting the institution, or we also believe that, like, a lot of the movies we would watch. So like Gladiator, right? You have the gladiator who's defying the emperor, the evil institution, right? He's resisting that. The Last Samurai, right? So you have the Last Samurai who are preserving the traditional way of life, which is so beautiful. You see all these village scenes, and then the modern world is coming in, and the emperor wants to go the way of the modern world, but the samurai resist, right? And so we see that too. And then we get really excited when watching Lord of the Rings, when you hear Galadriel, and she would say, but there were some who resisted.
You're like, that's she's talking about.
So this idea of like being the little guy, being the resistors to the big bad institutional church, like that permeates everything. It actually becomes part of your worldview, you know? And but of course, this constant distrust of authority, distrust of the institutions, that's an overreaction. Obviously, institutions can become corrupt. People can become corrupt. But a constant libertarian-like attitude that says governments are evil, institutions are evil, authority is evil, that is not compatible with a Catholic worldview.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, because the governmental structure of the church can't be fundamentally evil or so corrupted that it's doing more harm than good to the church. I mean, really, because then it's like, then the Holy Spirit has not been protecting the church in all her ways. I mean, it's not like individuals within the church won't make mistakes, but that's really, you're calling in so much doubt. It's like, well, if the church is supposed to be, our home and the one, institution of Christ to lead us to heaven, but there's all these things that you can't be sure of. It's like, there's really not a point in being Catholic then, is there? Because it's too uncertain. So you might as well just sit home and read your Bible and do what the Protestants do, because they're all just trying to do the right thing with what they've got. And we're doing the same thing. So we're really no different, right? I mean, what makes us different then?
Yes, exactly.
Oh, man. Gosh, that's just so interesting. I'm curious if you have any more sort of like specific story examples of like interactions or conversations that you had within your family, that, because I know you guys had a pretty like open floor dynamic of, we don't agree, but we're going to talk about it, or we'll try to agree, we'll hash it out until we get somewhere. And do you feel like that really did get you somewhere a lot of times, or like you felt closer together in some way after that, even if you still ideologically were on separate turf? Or
Yeah, no, sadly, no.
Oh.
I mean, whenever it came up, eventually I would just try to avoid it, right? Because my parents were very, of course, emotionally sensitive to the issue. I mean, I'm their eldest son, and they were afraid that my other siblings would follow my example. And so, yeah, there's just a lot of emotions that were a part of that whole experience. So it made it very difficult. I tried to avoid it, but when it would come up, it would be usually a very difficult conversation. I mean, they just felt very betrayed. They felt very betrayed that I would go back to the, terrible modernist church that they thought that they had discovered was wrong and was the actual whole problem to the crisis in the church. There's actually a funny little story. I remember, unbeknownst to me, my father actually invited one of the newly when this was happening, or a little while after this had happened, he invited a newly ordained priest. He was a newly ordained SSPX priest to come and visit our house. Came over to dinner, and unbeknownst to me, the reason Dad had invited this priest was to hopefully talk some sense into me.
Nice.
And so we were all sitting in the living room, talking about things. And eventually it came around to kind of a back and forth between me and the priest. And I just started asking him some of, the questions, the things that had caused me to leave, such as the relationship of the SSPX to the magisterium, and how could he reconcile their stance with a traditional Catholic, ironically, traditional Catholic approach to submission to the magisterium and submission to the Pope's authority. And how they could justify, rejection almost in toto of the Second Vatican Council. And if they don't, the parts they don't reject, completely ignoring it or ignoring its pastoral directives, and as well as some other issues. And anyway, it's the last encounter I really had with an SSPX priest like this. But the end result was him screaming at me. It's the last debate. He was just like, you need to be quiet and you need to know your place. You do not know what you're talking about, and you need to know your place. You're a layman, and not only that, but you're a young, inexperienced layman. Which of course is kind of funny coming from a priest as well. But I mean, it was like, yeah, I mean, he couldn't answer my arguments. I mean, all he could do was yell at me that the SSPX were the ones who were truly faithful to the Pope, and how dare I question their loyalty? So I hope to eventually have a better interaction with an SSPX priest at some point. I wish they would come on and talk with me, or debate with me. I'd love to have a debate that doesn't devolve into one of them screaming
hysteria.
at me.
Yeah, right.
That was my last debate with an SSPX priest.
Oh my gosh. Oh no. I mean, I have to say it is a little odd. Even I always hear an excuse when it's brought up that SSPX priests were, no one can be spared of their about 700 priests to, not even one priest to work in apologetics and, public engagement in these issues to help catechize people. It's like, they say, well, but they're too busy with their pastoral work. And it's like, but pastoral work also includes spreading the gospel to those who don't have the fullness of it and bringing them into the church. And I don't see that happening. It's like they're all just preserving the ones they've already got. And I definitely, it would seem that they don't have answers to these things, and that would be exposed if they were to try to engage with people publicly, and just like this priest with you. And that has been my experience with traditionalists. If they will consent to even talk to you about things past a certain point, it devolves into a yelling match. Like, or I'm not yelling, but they're yelling, because they can't answer my questions. They interrupt. They just can't stand hearing certain things. And then there's always these stock phrases that come out that are supposed to be their defense, but they're not rational. It's purely emotion. It just always devolves to purely emotion. And I'm like, very interesting. Like, if you had an argument, we should be able to talk about this calmly, and you should be able to prove to me without a doubt that I should be holding your position. And that has never happened. Mm-hmm. Not in 15 years. No.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it can be tough. I mean, we're all people. We're all emotional, right? I mean, we're all emotional creatures, right. And some of us have more or less control over our emotions than others. So it's good to be patient with people, but yeah, I haven't ever, when I ask prying questions about certain issues and certain problematic stances that either the Archbishop took or the society and its priests take today. People always want to change the subject. They always want to say, well, what about the Pope kissing the Quran? Or what about, religious liberty? Or what about, this? Or what about that? They will not address. They do not have good answers for their own problematic opinions when challenged on it. And I hope that will change. But like you said, the policy of the SSPX is to engage in apologetics on their terms and on their ground. So they'll do a Crisis in the Church series, or they'll do a mock debate like their two. I think they did a conference on the papacy. I think it was 2012. They did a conference and they staged a mock debate between two SSPX priests, and one of the SSPX priests was actually just reading the state of conscience positions that had been written by the other SSPX priest who was defending the SSPX position. And of course, the state of conscience position wasn't even done justice. I mean, it was like maybe a few paragraphs that stated their position, and then you got 10 minutes of the society's rebuttal to that. And not only that, but what shocked me was that they actually admitted in the course of the conference that they had reached out to State of Acontis, to ask questions and to prepare for their mock debate, and that multiple State of Acontis had offered to engage in a public debate for the conference. Like, they actually admitted that in the course of the conference, that there would have been a State of Acontis or several of them that would have come and actually engaged in like a State of Acontis versus SPX priest. Why wouldn't they do that if they had the opportunity to have a open discussion? But I mean, it just goes to show that they're uncomfortable with open conflict or open challenging of their positions. And I think it's because they know that their positions are superficial, that they're most of them are only skin deep, or they lose, they muddy the waters in canon law, and then they just repeat those same talking lines as they have been over the last 50 years. Right. And it's unfortunate.
Right. No, I appreciate your focus too on getting out of the waters of canon law, because canon law is important, but it's also, I mean, law, it's not a person. It's not a theology. You take it to the moral level and you're like, well, let's make this a little simpler for everybody and talk about how this affects people directly in the family unit of the church. And what is this doing? What does this look like if it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, quacks like a duck? It's probably a duck. It's like, yeah, I mean, that's how you make a rational argument.
Laura, no, Laura, you have no authority to declare it's a duck. Okay, you have no authority, so don't you dare say that it's a duck.
I will leave my brain on the shelf. I will be a good clericalist. Oh my gosh, no, it's weird too, because like there's this suspicion that I see in the traditionalist movement, that it's like, always analyze and always be ready to catch those heretics when they come your way, but they look for the heretics in a certain place in a certain way. Like, I was also raised with a certain measure of skepticism, but it didn't undermine like my basic ability to trust. It was like, always listen to what you're hearing, educate yourself and filter it. But if you hear a priest or somebody say something that isn't true Catholic doctrine, like, it's probably just because they weren't formed well or whatever. Like, it's not it's not like they're off the rails or they're not really a real priest or anything like that. It never got conspiratorial. It was just like, know it yourself, because the responsibility is on you when you die, that God's going to, say, what have you done with your soul? How have you invested in, getting to heaven, and not, he's not going to first turn to the priest. I mean, yeah, they have responsibility, but it's like, so we were taught to weigh things and to be discerning, but not to just, to look for problems everywhere and to distrust everyone, or the magisterium. It was like, if it's officially church teaching, even in a motu proprio or whatever, it's like, you can trust it because God is directing that. And that's something that is always up for grabs in trad land.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. And that's good, because I mean, we all have to be discerning when we encounter, either heresy or schism, in the church, because it always happens. And that's the point I try to make over and over again, is that when a declaration of heresy or a declaration of schism happens, it doesn't mean that it was only at the point that declaration happens that it's been heresy, right? Oh, now it's heresy because it's been declared, or now it's schism because it's been declared. No, it's been a heresy for a long time. If it's gotten to the point of a declaration, it's been heresy for a while, or it's been schism for a while. So just as you can recognize, if you were to walk into, a church in, I don't know, the Twin Cities or something, and it was like gay, like a gay mass, you would know that was schismatic, right? Because they were refusing to submit to the authority of the church in the faithful celebration of the rubrics. I mean, it would be a terrible, terrible sacrilege, right?
Yeah.
And especially if it's been going on for a long time, right? I mean, it's a refusal of submission to the authority of the Roman pontiff over the liturgy. And that the same thing goes for those like women priests. Like there's a whole segment of women priests, quote unquote priests, who have been ordained, quote unquote ordained again, who are like waiting for the church to come around to women's ordination. That's also a schismatic group, right?
Yeah.
And they were schismatic, and heretical, of course, because usually schism and heresy go hand in hand. Long before they were excommunicated. And often many of them haven't even been explicitly excommunicated. The excommunication happens instantly when they try to have themselves ordained, kind of a thing. So the other thing that goes into this is this false idea that let's see, how can I put this? That schism is only like restricted to the area of canon law or the juridical life of the church. Like it's just a political thing. And that completely neglects the fact that schism is actually a sin against charity, even before it's a canonical crime. The church's canon law is built around the moral law, around the moral and divine law, and flows from it. It's a practical application of it. And so that's why the schism is something that's so much more multi-layered, and the understanding of it is a lot more complex than just the juridic definition, right? Just the canonical definition of it. Because, I mean, other definitions that I have brought up, I brought them up in my debate as well as in my open letter to Father Golowski, was that it's also a separation from the whole, a separation from the common life of the church. It's a division. I mean, that's what schism means. It's a separation and a division. And this word is used by St. Paul when he says, "Let there be no schisms among you. Let there be no divisions among you." And those divisions were mainly around, they weren't even necessarily around a heresy. They were around persons, right? Some of them were saying they were of Apollo, or some of them were of Cephas, or some of them were of Paul, right? They were coming around personalities, and then they were saying, we're being the faithful Catholics, and you guys aren't legit Catholics. And that created disruption in the unity. St. Paul says, no, we're all supposed to be one in Christ. And so schism is something that is the direct result of a transgression against charity, because charity brings together, and sin pulls apart, sin separates.
Yeah.
And so we have to remember that the refusal to act as part of the whole is part of this rich, multi-layered understanding of what it means to live as a Catholic in unity with the church. And because I don't think anybody can deny that the SSPX are not, and Sedevacantist clergy, they're not one with the church. They're not acting in union with the church or part of the common life of the church. And that's de facto schism. All the other things aside.
Right. They do fit the juridical definition of schism. They can deny it all day long, but they do.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And I was just at a funeral recently where it was celebrated by a diocesan priest in the 1962 missal. And there, half or more of the congregation I knew to be people who regularly attend the SSPX. And, everything, like you almost couldn't find any fault with anything that went on at that mass. And, we're all there together, and then it's time for communion, and I had to nudge the guy in front of me and tell him he needed to go up because he was waiting for half of the congregation to go. And I said, they're not going. And he was like, oh, okay. So we got up and we went to communion, and we walked by all these people. It's like, you profess to be Catholics. We profess to be Catholics. You claim, you'll deny all day long that you're not in schism, but you won't go to communion with us. Like, this is even a 1962 missal mass by a priest who to not be a heretic. Okay. Yes. It's like, it's not good enough for you. And then you're sitting there wearing veils as if you're acknowledging that the real presence is in that church. And yet it's not enough for you to make you go up and receive communion. And I'm like, you're refraining from communion with the members subject to the Roman pontiff, which is, part B of that definition of schism. And I was just like, this is so sad. It's like, some of you are my friends. We can't go to communion together. What's Catholic about that? Like, you tell me, because it makes no sense.
Right. Yeah. And then that policy is actually, that is the official policy of the SSPX. The reason that they don't go to communion, even though, they're participating in a funeral wedding, is because of the mixture. So if the priest goes back to get hosts that have been consecrated from the tabernacle, so even if it's a TLM mass, if he goes to get hosts that are consecrated at a Novus Ordo mass, those are doubtful validity, because the SSPX, even though it claims to accept the validity of the new mass, it sees it as very doubtful. And that's another reason why it also discourages its members to attend or go to the fraternity masses as well, because fraternity priests will also go, if they happen to be saying a mass in a diocesan church, they will also go to get the ciborium with hosts that have been consecrated, possibly at a Novus Ordo mass. So, I mean, you can see, like you pointed out, these actions that show that there is a real division are a result of the official teachings and policies of the society itself, or of other traditionalist clergy, such as Sedevacantists and otherwise.
Right. Oh, man. Yeah, that's it. It's really, and it all goes down to their interpretation of sacramental intention, right? Which you guys had covered a little bit in one of your videos with John Salza and Dom about Archbishop Lefebvre's teaching on what makes a valid sacrament or not. Although, so they're going off of his theology about what makes a valid sacrament. So therefore, it calls into question the validity of Novus Ordo consecrated Eucharist. But then they'll, even though Archbishop Lefebvre's own orders, according to his own interpretation, would be invalid because the bishop who consecrated him withheld the intention of ordaining him and admitted it publicly. Like, that's, I mean, so it's like, oh, wow. Like, you guys, you want him to be a priest and a bishop, legit, and all his successors to be real, but then everybody else is suspect. But it's a double standard. It's really
right. Yeah. That's what John Salza was pointing out, was that in the accusation that the Archbishop Lefebvre's orders were invalid, the SSPX proceeded to defend it according to Orthodox sacramental theology. But then when it comes to the other sacraments, such as the validity of certain baptisms or of the Novus Ordo Missae, the new rite of Mass itself, then they apply a different criteria. Yeah, so there are many inconsistencies like that, as I'm sure you're familiar with in my open letter. I kept stumbling across these problems in the society's position that were either contradictory or inconsistent. When you start scratching below the surface of the things that they teach, you realize that they are not actually adhering to traditional Catholic teaching. They've come up with a justification in order to justify their separation from Rome. They've come up with all of these sophisticated arguments, which are actually not in line with the Church's tradition.
Right. So there's a lot of focus on appearances and externals. You've used the word facade before, or let me take you backstage behind the Catholic props, you said in your open letter, which is really interesting. It's like, so that's obviously a big fixture of traditionalism, is like the externals are important, the rubrics, all these things, like we're going to really hold these up. Did you really feel that when you were growing up in that environment, or even within your own family, like a pressure to sort of keep up appearances, or that, like everything's important, morally, but especially what's on the external, like how you dress and how you behave and all these practices and devotions and things? I mean, is that?
There definitely is a large emphasis, and of course, as you know, there's nothing wrong with externals. I mean, externals are important, but yes, the externals are overemphasized, and oftentimes the true reason for doing one of those external gestures or customs is not understood. It's not fully understood or fully accepted, and one of the things I remember encountering was that, girls would come and they would dress one way for church or in their circles, and then outside of Mass they would dress another, even to the point of like going and wearing a bikini on the beach. So they might be dressed, to the nines in a skirt that comes below the knee, and then when they're on vacation they were in bikinis. So for a lot of us, the externals, it's only skin deep. It's what we do because we're a part of this group, this community. But the true spirit behind why you would do that is not necessarily fully understood or fully embraced. And I mean, there are some people, of course. I mean, it's not true across the board that some people don't understand, that some people don't embrace the spirit of the thing as well. Because I've met many people who did, but yeah, the emphasis on the externals is definitely a large feature.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, that's one thing specifically about like women veiling in church that I've noticed. I've never met an older woman who, veiled before, the reforms were put into place, who understood anything about why she was doing it. It was just what we always did. And it was a relief when I didn't have to, because my kids weren't pulling it off all the time or whatever. It just wasn't something I didn't have to put a Kleenex on my head when I ran into church every, thing. And I was like, okay, I grew up without it, and it was foreign to me. And when I found it as a teenager, I was like, well, veiling is really cool. I wonder why you would do that. And I looked into it, and then I was like, well, the church doesn't require it anymore, but it's still a valid option. And I thought maybe this is why the church removed the requirement, because it gave people the opportunity, if they felt like it was oppressive, they weren't bound to it anymore. And then it gave them the opportunity to discover it again and decide voluntarily to assume that practice because of its merit. And so now I see more and more women veiling. And I know when I see a woman veiling, at least in a Novus Ordo parish, I know that she's doing it because she found out about it and decided that was something that was going to help her prayer. And, and she's doing it for good reasons. She's not just doing it because other people are doing it. And I'm like really edified by that. I think it's very liberating, and it's cool to see people come back. It's like, if it's a good thing, it will come back. It will prove its own merit if it's really, if it's really got value. So
that's a good point.
But
yeah.
I'm wondering if you can comment at all on what you observed in your own family as far as, divisions or quarrels or things that were difficult times that you guys went through. You guys were real questioners, and you were always trying to get to the bottom of things and fully understand what you were doing so you could throw yourselves into it all the way. You were whole hog Marine types, And so that was, you guys were a unique family, but you moved in circles where there were a lot of other people who would consider themselves very hardcore, even if they took more of a loyalist party line stance as far as like the society went or sedevacantism. Like, did you observe, like, what other things did you observe about those families, like, that might have been similar to your own experience?
Yes, there are definitely different approaches. You have, I would say, probably the majority that I encountered were the people who accept the party line. So those were the people that said, we trust the Society of St. Pius X. We trust their talking points. We believe that they have been given the authority, by God to do this, and so we're going to follow them. So they buy into the party line, and they're happy because they can go to a traditional Latin mass, and they don't necessarily really get into the politics of anything. And so when the resistance happened, and the society priests were condemning these other priests and Bishop Williamson from the pulpit, they just said, "Oh, they're a bunch of renegades, that are breaking away from the society," right? So those are the party liners. My experience was that those were the majority in the SSPX, but then I also knew, in our community that I grew up in, there were also some other sedevacantists that would come to the SSPX church, and there were also some other families who, you might say, would pay attention to what was going on as well. But I would say it was definitely the sedevacantists that caught my attention the most, because there was another family. They were they had boys about my age, so they were in my peer group. Spent a lot of time with them, but they were sedevacantists. They supported the Congregation of Mary Immaculate Queen, and they also would host the priests at their house. So because there was no chapel of the Congregation of Mary Immaculate Queen here in our part of Montana, they would offer the mass in those of us who would open our houses to them.
Okay.
So this other family opened their house to them. We did, and then there were a couple other people I knew as well.
Okay.
And I remember when a parishioner must have found out about it and told the pastor, our SSPX pastor, that we were hosting these priests. They came and informed us that we would not be permitted. We would have our key taken away to the chapel, because the families each had a key, because we would help clean the chapel, and or that way we could visit the Blessed Sacrament and things like that. And we were told that our key would be taken away. And so my father said, okay, well, we won't host them at our house anymore. But this other family, who were both parents were sedevacantists, they handed their key in. They're like, okay, well, fine, and they just left at that point.
Did they like move away physically?
No, they just left the chapel. Yeah, so they would just have mass that the CMRI priest would come and offer them. But yeah, so I saw right there that kind of division. Also, my interactions, it was interesting. My interactions with my peers, the other young people who were being raised in this environment. It's funny because even though we resisted the authority, because of my father's background in the Marine Corps, he still had a healthy respect for authority. And again, he believed that we should still respect authority. And even like the modernist popes, right? So they're still the Pope, so we should respect them, even if they were heretics. And I remember with my sedevacantist buddies, they would just be making fun of the Pope. And I, just saying, derogatory things. And I would say, you really shouldn't say that. that's not respectful, So I appreciate, it was probably one of those little seeds of truth that were planted that helped me, eventually in my journey, standing up for the Pope like that. But also another one was with my best friend, and I was telling him a story. I was on a train and I encountered a Jehovah's Witness, and she asked me, what I was, and I told her, yeah, I'm a Catholic. And, so we were talking about our faith. And so I was telling my buddy later, I said, yeah, I was talking to this gal. She was a Jehovah's Witness. And I told her I was a Catholic. And he said, you shouldn't have said that. He said, we're not just Catholics. We are traditional Catholics.
Oh, my goodness.
What? What? I have to say that? I'm not just, a Catholic kind of a thing, And so, of course, looking back on that, I now understand, right? You've got to put this qualifier on, because you don't want to be associated with or have people think that you're one of those heretic Catholics, or one of those Catholics that worship with clown masses.
Ooh,
You're not one of those. You are a traditional Catholic, which means you're one of the true Catholics. So it was encounters like this, among my peer groups, and seeing the interactions between all of our families that showed that there was definitely not a true unity, either between us and other Catholics, or even amongst ourselves with these different groups, such as the Sedevacantists and the SSPX, and then eventually the Resistance.
Okay. All right. So one thing I'm kind of hearing, I'm just thinking about this interesting community dynamic you guys had with Sedevacantist families and SSPX loyalist families, and people who are just kind of floating, resistance families. And like, you're all just making do with the local chapel because that's what you got. Like, heavens to Betsy, that's better than nothing. So we're just staying here, even though it's kind of like, that had to be awkward. Like, there's things maybe you didn't feel like you could talk about, or like your mom's conscious, but your dad isn't. So after Mass on Sunday, is your mom going to go out and chew the fat about how, well, y'all think that Pope Benedict or whatever isn't real Pope, but, he is, but I don't think so. And I mean, like, was that acceptable? I mean, did you get shut down, or were there things that you just knew you couldn't bring up? Or
Absolutely. Yep. That's exactly right. You just said it was like Thanksgiving dinner, right? Where you didn't want to talk about politics. Yeah. It was like, Sunday. No, if you're a Sedevacantist and you're going to a place where it's majority SSPX who hold the party line, you aren't going to, you don't bring that up. So often what would happen, the Sedevacantists, if they wanted to talk about, the latest heresy or the latest thing that they read on Novus Ordo Watch or whatever, they would go and have a group, right? And they would they could talk, because the other Sedevacantists, knew each other, right? So the Sedevacantists knew each other, and then the party line, would talk, and then when there was interaction between those two groups, you don't talk
friendly. No, you don't bring your boxing gloves to Mass because you might just another friend of mine, she said whenever she would if they'd hear the priest preaching and he would say something that just didn't sit right with them, she's like, after Mass, we're all outside in our little groups, and she'd go up to one and they'd be talking. She'd be like, so, what did you think about Father's homily? And when he said this, what do you think about that? And every time she said, everybody would look at her and like, I can't say I really shouldn't be talking about that. Like, they thought it was like a sin to talk about what the priest said in the homily, especially if they might potentially not agree with it. It's like they wouldn't even question it. They wouldn't even discuss it. Not even in a friendly way. Like, can you explain that to me? Like, maybe I didn't hear right. It was just dead. And she was like, oh, okay. Well, I guess if we can't, I was like, wow, if that was a family environment at home, that would be stifling. I mean, I would not do well.
No, that was my experience. The clergy are given high status, right? They're given the respect. We always have to give them respect and deference. Especially because they're a priest that said, they're at a society priest, or they're, and they say the TLM, right? And so they're one of the faithful priests. And so, no, it was very discouraged to question, to question your priests, to question the authorities. Those of us, such as my parents, who would question, were looked on as, kind of outcasts. Like, you guys aren't being faithful, to the group, to the team, right? You guys are calling into question, right?
Which is
But
so weird because Catholicism is like traditionally, it's like it welcomes all your questions. It's not a cult. There's never a point at which you're not supposed to enter any further to, probe into things. It's like a wide open, so that right there is like, wait a second, I'm
yeah,
not supposed to talk about stuff. Like, this isn't, who are you to tell me that I can't even ask a question? Like, don't you want me to ask questions if I have them? And
yeah,
so that you can resolve them, give me the
right.
answers. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll give you a concrete example of one. There was one priest that we had who would say mass at our chapel who was very sloppy with his celebration of the mass, right? And this is the 1962, right? Traditional
Yeah, right.
mass law. You
Yeah.
can't be abused, right?
Yeah.
Only the Novus Ordo can be abused because everything's loosey goosey over there, but it's much harder to abuse,
Yeah.
the TLM, right? But this priest, he would go through prayers super super fast, and he would often do things that were odd, such as like genuflect really hard and make everything shake, right?
Oh,
Because he was a big man, he was huge, and he would
yeah.
genuflect, boom,
Oh, no.
or he would he went during the lavabo because I would serve for him. You would offer them the towel, and he'd take it, and he'd throw it back in the server's face, and just kind of this way of doing things that was very kind of abrupt, in your face, sloppy, or whatever it was. And it was scandalous to a lot of the people, but nobody called him out on it. Like, nobody went out and said, Father, could you change, or could you, maybe do things a little bit differently? I feel like this is a little sloppy or whatever. It was just like, oh, that's Father so-and-so. That's kind of his style, and he's doing that thing. And yeah, it's not the greatest, but he's the priest coming to offer us the mass. But I remember there was one of the parishioners just left. I mean, they were just like, well, I'm not going to come to mass, right? They just decided.
Yeah, where's the reverence? That's really disturbing. People who
and that attitude too, because of course, whenever there wasn't, it was every other week that we were given the mass, that a priest would drive from Post Falls, Idaho, and offer the mass, and the off Sundays. Because of course you wouldn't go to the other church to fulfill your Sunday obligation. You were dispensed because that would be harmful to your faith. So we would all come together and pray the rosary. And so of course that gives you this justification that, well, if you think something's harmful to your faith, right, then you're dispensed from the Sunday obligation. Yeah. So of course this individual that just left and wouldn't come to mass because of this priest was being consistent with that, that false teaching that because things might be hard, or you might be encountering something that's difficult in your church, that you can just leave, that somehow you're dispensed from your Sunday obligation because you think that it's harming your faith or that it's not pleasing to God.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. Another friend of mine who had lived, kind of grown up in different SSPX churches, she was really involved in music, and she's like, every priest was so different, the way he wanted music done or not done, or like it always, they never explained the reasons for things. They never educated the musicians about the musical rubrics of the mass. She's like, it was just, well, Father wants this, Father doesn't want that, with no explanation. And she's like, and they were all different. She's like, they were all doing their own thing. And so people who weren't following the liturgy really carefully would say, in the pews, they're like, oh, well, the mass is always the same, and no priest is going to mess around with it. She's like, well, they were doing whatever they wanted, and we weren't educated about, by and large, how to even understand what was happening. And so coming into more of an acquaintance with the Novus Ordo and meeting people who were informed about sacred music documents and different things, she's like, I never even understood that was right or wrong. Nobody ever bothered to tell me or tell me why we did these things. And, they say, yeah, like there's no abuse, or, every care is taken in the TLM or in the society. And she's like, it's just not true. But unless you work closely in the liturgy, or like you were a server, an MC even for a while there. Yes. And so it's like, yeah, you knew it inside out. You knew what was going on, but it's not like, but then it's not okay to talk about it. So you can't even let other people know what's going on because they wouldn't listen to you, probably.
Yeah.
Oh, that's rough. Oh, man. I'm curious about how you feel. Sorry, I'm trying to think about it. Now that you've had time away from traditionalism, in and a more fuller experience of communion with the Catholic Church, like how have you found things to be different here, or like have you found more close and edifying friendships? Like have you felt more welcomed and more engaged with people here? Like I've heard just different things that indicated it can be very isolating to be in traditionalism, even though you're all thinking along similar lines, but everybody's still got a little bit their own take of things. And I wonder if you find that any different in the more Novus Ordo community.
We had a really great chapel where I grew up, and our community was actually pretty close knit. So the people there were really welcoming, wonderful to hang out with, just generally great people, and I still, hang out, my best friend, still from that community, and, I still hang out with him whenever I can. So my experience was actually really good, but I have heard that our experience was a little more exceptional, that other churches could tend to be a bit more cold or a bit more isolating, not as welcoming, a bit more cliquish, a lot more cliques. That's one thing with that we kind of had a difference with ourselves and, the church or the priory that our chapel is attached to, that main church had a tendency to be a bit more cliquish. Okay. So I have heard that, but my experience in the small little country chapel, which only had about, maybe 200 people in it, was pretty different for me. Yeah.
Okay. That's a better report. That's good. Yeah. So, okay. I'm interested too, because I know that your family of origin, like your parents both came from Protestantism. And most of their, well, really all their family is still Protestant, right?
Yes, so
that's right. What denomination are they?
On my mom's side, it varies. She's from the South, so it's a combination of, Baptists, mostly Baptists, and then some other ones thrown in there. But then on my dad's side, they're all Assemblies of God.
Okay. So how did your Protestant family take your parents becoming Catholic? I mean, how did they behave? Did they act any differently towards you guys really after that happened?
Yeah, definitely. They were very worried when mom and dad made the decision to become Catholic. You might say the patriarch and matriarch, Grandma and Grandpa Bartel, that my dad's dad went to them and was just telling them, how concerned he was that Curtis, and Joy were going to become Catholic, and they said, "Oh, don't worry about Curtis and Joy; they're going to be just fine," and so that, because the matriarch said that, she was very, very revered, in my family, because they were both my great grandmother and my great grandfather were just in love with the Bible, lived a life of incredible service to their community, just exemplary Christians. I mean, they were just amazing. And so once they said that, things settled down a little bit, but of course people still weren't super happy about it. But I'd say it especially got even worse though when mom and dad became Traditionalist Catholics, because the Traditionalist Catholic perspective towards Protestants, of course, is very harsh. It can be very harsh. You don't have anything to do with them. You don't pray with them. You don't worship with them. And so that whole my parents being able to pray with their relatives was just cut off. We don't have anything to do with the faith life of the rest of the family anymore, because we're Traditionalist Catholic and we can't pray with heretics.
Ooh, wow, that's rough. So they were still willing to pray with you, but you felt unable to pray with them. For how long did that last?
It lasted all the way until I came back into the church, and then my parents came back about 5 years after me during the Year of Mercy, and after that we actually had a family reunion And during that family reunion, because two of my uncles, my great uncles, my grandfather has two brothers, both of which are prominent ministers in the Assemblies of God, and one of them usually leads the family, service on Sunday. And so after my parents had come to the church, we of course still, we didn't substitute for mass, because of course you still have to fulfill your Sunday obligation.
Yeah.
You can't substitute, but you are permitted, if you have permission from your pastor, and there isn't risk of scandal, you can worship with another Christian community. Just there are certain stipulations, like not receiving communion and things like that.
Yeah.
But especially since it wasn't even like a church we were going to. This is family worship. Yeah. But because of that, because of this openness to being able to pray with fellow Christians, even our separated Protestant brothers and sisters, this was the first time we were all able to come together and listen to the Bible, listen to, my great uncle give his sermon, and pray together as a family. And it was a very, very powerful and healing experience, both for my family and for, our extended family as well.
Wow, that's awesome. So what was that, like 12 years or something? And like that gap of time that passed?
Yes. Yeah.
That can be a long time. Wow, that's really interesting. So your understanding of ecumenism, which is a bad word, in trad circles, but easily misunderstood, I guess, because it's not like it's just saying everything is fine, everything is equally good. But obviously there's a real different, almost like the church's development of that teaching on ecumenism has it like cut off, since the SSPX doesn't adhere to the Vatican II teachings and stuff. It's like everything is just so they haven't benefited from that development, other than the way the church acts towards them. The church treats them and extends to them the same kind of hand as she does to everyone. But how is that, coming to understand that? Was that kind of like, oh my gosh, this is really uncomfortable for you? Or
yeah, no, it was, of course, it was definitely different from what I'd been used to before, but it was totally right. It felt so much more positive, right? We weren't accepting, their Protestant errors or sola scriptura or anything like that, but we were recognizing that we had, a shared baptism, a shared love of the Word of God, a shared devotion to the Holy Spirit, all the things that we share in common as Christians. Even though we have our differences, we were able to celebrate those together, and to be able to pray together, because of the recognition that even though there may be, differences and heresies, that we can still, that we do actually, in fact, worship the same God. We still are saved by the same, Christ. And of course, we Catholics believe that salvation is through the church. But we have the fullness, and we know we have the fullness of faith. But at the same time, it's an acknowledgement of those elements of grace and sanctification and goodness that are outside of the physical, juridical boundaries of the structure, especially Christian ecclesial communities. Because, of course, it only makes sense that we would have a different approach, because all of these people have actually been raised in these separate ecclesial communities. They're not ex-Catholics anymore. They're just trying to be sincere Christians. So it only makes sense that the church would change her approach, and that would actually be beneficial to evangelization, and hopefully the eventual bringing in of other Christian communities into union with the church.
Yeah, that's awesome. Right. That's such a good point about them not being ex-Catholics, because if we continue to treat them like they just, rejected the church yesterday, and they wouldn't even understand it. They're like, why do you feel like that about us? Why are we so different? Like, obviously they know there's something different, but yeah, I could see that definitely just widening the rift. And it's not really, the church's responsibility is to bring unity to all Christians, really. So it's like, it falls to her. That's even where that Assisi convention, that prayer convention of Pope John Paul II, that has stirred up a lot of people. But that was really, I mean, he was the only one to do something like that. And then Pope Benedict after him, it's like no one else, no other denomination or, religion in the world was making an effort like that to bring people together. But the church is about Catholicism, universality, and unity. And it's like, let's come together as much as we can, even though we're all trying to follow our consciences and that looks different, but we don't want to reject anything good that you hold to. Let's build on it instead of break it down even more.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, this has been wonderful, Laura. I'm so sorry to have to cut it short, but I've got to, speaking of the family, I've got to go and get my children up from their nap. So.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I don't want to keep you. Do you have time for maybe one more question?
Sure, we could probably do one more.
Okay. Just curious about today, now that your family has sort of joined back into the full communion of the church and you guys have made that journey together, even though at different times, if there's anything you would comment on about how your life and your family bond is different now.
Yes, absolutely. Well, one of the big saving graces of my family coming back into union of the church is that many of my siblings who were on the verge of leaving the faith because of not seeing, one of my sisters was dating a Protestant at the time, and she did not see, she looked at the interactions between me and my parents and what was happening in the traditionalist community. She said, how is that any different from the Protestants? She could see that it was the exact same thing, especially when my parents eventually got to the point for a brief time of believing that nobody had it right, not the Novus Ordo Church or any of the traditionalist clergy, and so they were home alone, which is exactly what her Protestant boyfriend was doing with his family, worshiping alone in their family. And she said she was looking at that and saying, how are we any different than the Protestants? So she was on the verge of just becoming the same faith as her boyfriend. And my other siblings who were older were also struggling. I think one of them in particular may not even have stayed Christian if we had stayed in that kind of an environment. But after coming into the church, and just the church today is just so full of life and openness and beauty and goodness. And there's so many positive and exciting developments that are happening in theology and in the church's approach to the modern world, and discussions about how we can best bring Christ to the modern world. And there's so much, there's life. There's life to be a part of the family of God, that covenant family of the church. You become a part. That becomes infused into your family life as well, into your domestic church. Yeah. And so my family was immediately drawn together once, even though we still have debates and discussions and disagreements about certain things, but we all accept the authority of the church. We all accept the authority of the magisterium. And because of that, we're unified. And the authority of my parents as well, which was undermined by their rejection of church authority, has grown stronger, because, of course, if they're being faithful to church authority, then they also then can have a claim on their children's obedience, because the children can't point at their parents and say, well, if you can disobey, the Pope, the Holy Father and the church and your authorities, why can't I disobey you? And so authority has been rebuilt and is now supported in our family group in a way that is so much more beneficial to family life. So we do actually have a unity that we did not have or experience before.
Oh, wow, that is awesome. It's the first time in so many years that your parents have thought the same way about the papacy and the magisterium and like all these things that before they could argue and couldn't find a way to come together on. And now it's like it just fell into place and everybody's benefiting.
That's right. Yes.
Wow. So that's awesome. Well, thank you, Andrew, so much for your time and everything you shared. It was great. So we'll probably have to do it again.
Yes. No, it's been a pleasure, Laura. Thanks for having me on.
All right, sure. Okay, well, everyone, thank you for watching, and we hope to see you again on my channel in future live streams with Andrew and possibly others. So leave your comments, like, subscribe, and have a blessed day.